Yep.
Any of the officers.
Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to our Committee of Council for Wednesday the 15th of June 2022. And nice to see nearly a full house within the chamber. Welcome back, some of you. Also online we'll have Councillor Dingwell and Councillor Bowen will be joining us a little bit later, so she'll be an apology for lateness. Councillors, I'll just go through the housekeeping. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on our Council's YouTube channel. Health and safety procedures are on screen there. Everyone's well used to them, and unlike the event of an emergency, we exit via the green signs and we evacuate to the assembly area at the clock tower in the square Te Marae o Hine. Building is obviously a non-smoking facility. Again, unlikely event of the need for a defibrillator, that is located in the front of house on the ground floor. If I could ask councillors and officers and their presenters, please speak clearly into the microphone and just give your name before speaking. All right, we'll go through our order of business. And number one is apologies, and I'll look to the committee resolving apologies be received from Councillor Bowen for late arrival. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I'll ask you to vote, please. And that has passed 15 votes for and none against. Right, we will move through to any late items, notification of any late items. There is none, officially, nothing from the floor. I'll go through to number 3, which is around declarations of interest. And again, I haven't been notified of anything. All right, we'll move through to the confirmation, number 4, confirmation of the minutes. And the committee resolves that the minutes of the Committee of Council meeting 26th of May 2022, Part 1 public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Page 5 of your papers, councillors. Is there any matters arising, anything to be corrected there? There being none, we will look to vote, please. And that has passed, 15 votes for and none against. All right, moving through to number 5 on our agenda is the new animal shelter building and a paper there and report from our property manager, Bryce Hosking, around increases to the budget. So, Bryce, so on page 27 of your papers, councillors. Bryce, welcome.
Morena, councillors. Just a quick sort of summary introduction. So this is a project that began back in early 2019 when the Code of Welfare changes came into effect, and it was found that our existing animal shelter was not compliant with the code. At that case, we engaged an external consultant to be doing a business case for us, looking at a whole variety of options really, whether we could be partnering with another TA or whether we could be entering into a public-private type partnership arrangement, along with actually looking to renovate the existing facility or alternatively even looking to build a new one. At that stage, Council, on balance, we basically had no interest from any of the other parties. Majority of the councils around us were too far away, with the exception of Manawatu District Council. We engaged into quite a series of conversations with them, and ultimately it was decided from MDC they had no interest in engaging with us on this project. From there, began to do a whole bunch of designs from then and have brought them back to council through a series of papers, the most recent one being in February 2021, which we basically were able to lock in a preferred design, removing the educational centre that was proposed on the site, agreeing on a broad scope, in which case for the last 18 months or so we've been progressing through the detailed design phase. Really looking to get to a point that we could go out for tender, which we have just managed to do. Through that process, obviously the construction market has proved to be very difficult. Costs are going up, materials are increasing considerably. There's a lot of limited capacity in the marketplace. The international pressures of several things are driving up prices and making things difficult. Really, there's no easy deals, as someone put it to me the other day. So in an effort to combat that, we took a bit longer in the design phase to really take the time to be value engineering, looking at the scope, seeing what we could be cutting out, seeing what we could reduce and change. It must be said, out of all the projects I've been involved in over the last 5 years at council, we've probably spent more time in the design phase on this one, doing value engineering, than we probably have on many of the others. And that was really as a way to be trying to get to this point, and I committed a few weeks ago that the figure that would be put in front of you today, I could stand here confidently, or sit in this case, and say this was the best price that we could get for the scope that's going to deliver on the outcomes. And I'm pleased to say that I can say that now with confidence that that is the case. So really on that note, I'm happy to hand over for any questions.
Thanks, Bryce. There'll be a number. I'll kick off. Can I just ask why so long? I can recall us going as a council 3.5 years ago, and I get the COVID thing and everything else, but we're 3.5 years and we've just seen the cost escalation. I understand it's a reasonably complex building, but most are in our regulatory framework that we operate in. So why so long?
COVID definitely did play an impact. We've probably lost 5 months out of that process just through that. The design consultants had a continual rolling number of people going off ill with COVID. So that definitely didn't help. We probably spent an extra three months at least doing value engineering. Really looking at every single element of this project, looking at all the materials, the size, what we were trying to achieve, and really taking the time to rigor that, and in many cases actually having to redesign it. So a number of the changes that I've demonstrated through this report of the things we looked at through that design phase actually required a redesign because they were quite substantial. Redesigning the drainage, the kennel layouts, the way the office portion was going to be functioning. We really went back to first principles and redesigned everything. It wasn't just simple as moving some walls around.
Okay, and a couple of further questions. When was the last time we had a discussion with MDC in terms of partnering?
It would have been probably mid-2019 was the last time I was involved in it.
Bearing in mind the cost has quadrupled, or whatever it has, would we not have gone back and checked that everyone's position had either changed or was the same?
Well, since 2021, the price has escalated by about 30%, which is pretty consistent with what the construction market is doing over the last 18 months. Well, ultimately, council passed a resolution and made the decision to be, the preferred option was to be building a new facility. So we've been acting under that.
2.9 million. It's now 7.
Sure, in 2019 it was 2.9 million, but I did caveat at the time that that was very much a conceptual blocks on paper exercise to try and to show and demonstrate what a facility might look like. Probably a better reference point would be in 2021 when I was able to bring you some developed designs that actually looked into what this facility would look like in a bit more detail. And that was when we increased the budget to 4.5. That's probably a much better marker indication from then till now.
There's still quite a difference to 7.3.
Yes, although that 4.5 was based on, primarily construction, but obviously there's been a lot of work since then, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll leave everyone wants to have a question, Bryce. So, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce, for the update. First question is around the financial penalties that are prescribed in the Animal Welfare Act 1999 for being non-compliant to the code. Are you aware what the financial penalties are for council?
Well, unless someone from the animal control area has an updated figure, I did try quite hard to be doing some figure and some conversations with some contacts through the ministry to try find this out. Ultimately, the information I got would be at their discretion of what that fine would be, depending on how or the magnitude of the non-compliance and whether we were seen to be taking any action. In 2019, they agreed that as long as we were looking to begin some construction in the 22-23 financial year, we would avoid any fine or a breach notice or anything that comes with that, which we are still working towards. However, should we not proceed, well, that would be back on the table.
Okay, so my read of the Animal Welfare Act is that a body corporate is liable for $250,000 fine for every offence, and that will be every offence under the Animal Welfare Act where a dog or any other animal, come to that, would be subjected to a breach of the code. So on that basis, I would calculate that, 12 dogs would be about $3 million.
It'll definitely be a big number, yes. As I said, my contact who I spoke to in the ministry had said that some of that may be to their discretion, but it'll definitely be around that magnitude potentially, yes.
Thank you. Now I've got a question about the value engineering around the kennel size in 3.5, I think.
Yep.
So there's a list of reductions in scope that have been done to try and save money, and one of them is around reducing kennel size from 4 metres squared to 3 metres squared. So can you explain what advice you've had about the minimum size of kennels and whether or not 3 metres squared would be suitable for all sizes of dog?
3 metres squared is the legislative minimum for what you can get away with. I suppose best practice or the ideal would be closer to 4 square metres, which is what we were originally looking to do with the facility. However, in order to, for 2 reasons really, looking to actually get the kind of numbers we're looking to achieve in terms of capacity for there, but also looking to get some efficiencies through design. We were able to get that down to 3 metres, so it's still very compliant. It should, in the future, the Welfare Act increase that again. Well, we've designed it in a way that, whilst it will take some doing, it could be done, but we've also allowed a provision for an extra kennel block as well, so we could grow into that. And all of those things would need to be considered if that changes again. But in a simple answer to your question, 3 metres is the minimum, and that's what we're currently designed for. And that'll give them enough room to be able to turn around and do what they need to be doing to be comfortable during their stay with us.
So there won't be any, so all of the kennels will be that size, there won't be any kennels at say 4 metres for a bigger dog?
I think we have a couple, but 3 square metres should be sufficient. And then we've also got the smaller kennels and the puppy pen as well, so they will actually be in a more appropriate sized kennel block.
Okay, thank you. Now, you may be aware that 2 elected members have signalled a motion that would result in us not approving this recommendation today, and the effect of that would be at least to delay any construction and possibly not even to construct at all. Can you talk us through what the potential consequences of that motion might be for council?
If the instruction was to go away and do a redesign, essentially, to change the scope, we're probably going to need the best part of $200,000 of money to do that for the actual redesigning purpose. I think it is it would be a reasonable consideration of council that the cost to build this, regardless of the scope, is only going to go up. In the current market, the preferred tenderer has only guaranteed their price till the 30th of June. So in the past, we've managed to get contractors to do sort of a 3-month price hold, if you will, and they're just not willing to do that at the moment because of the pure escalation in cost. So even if we reduced the scope, we got it redesigned and we were happy to proceed, I couldn't guarantee that the overall price wouldn't be round about the same number anyway, but for a lesser scope and a potentially poorer outcome.
And what about in terms of the fact that we essentially have agreed with MPI to start building a new facility? Well,
yes, we have a certain degree of mana with MPI. We did what we said we were going to be doing. We've so far been moving in that direction, hence their agreement to not serve us with a breach notice and everything that comes with that until this financial year. Should we choose not to proceed with this today, we would be essentially moving away from that, and as I said earlier, we'd be at their discretion around what they want to do about that from a financial standpoint.
Thank you, Bryce.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce, for your report and the additional information that was provided through other questions. In regards to the non-compliance status, so we've obviously been non-compliant for 4 years-ish, but MPI have really only known about it for the last 2 years since their visit. Do they regard us as have been non-compliant for the last 2 years, or would it be 4 years?
They regard us as being non-compliant since the Welfare Act changed.
So that would be 4 years?
Correct.
About. Okay. And so with the comment, having regard to the comments you've given to the responses you've given to Councillor Johnson, and in 2.11, your comment around reassessing, I guess, the agreement to not act on the non-compliance at this stage, understanding that that's with a view that we are beginning in construction in the 22-23 year, do we have any idea as to what, if we go back to the drawing board, whether it's to reassess scope or look at other delivery mechanisms, if we essentially determine that we're not proceeding at this stage with the build, what would trigger a review of MPI's actions? Would we need to notify them of the outcome today, or how would that work?
I'm not sure. I don't know if the acting chief customer officer will have any idea of that, but I would imagine we're possibly obligated to notify them that we would be changing from our existing arrangement, but
Good morning, councillors. Through the chair, Kerry Lee Probert, Acting Chief Customer Officer. I would agree with our officer that we would be required to notify of our non-compliant status and our expected timeframes.
Okay. No, I don't have any further questions at the moment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Bryce. In your introductory comments, you provided us a very clear assurance around this being best price. Could you give us the same assurance around this being the full price?
yes, I can. We have included a contingency in the budget price, and whilst there is a chance or a risk that there could be some unexpecteds, I'm quite confident that that contingency will be able to cover any expected or unexpected items that may occur through the process.
Thank you. Second question, picking up on the Mayor's points around the other TAs around us. My read of the situation is that we are building a bit of future-proofing and capacity. Do we have any scope to establish any agreements where we may be able to see that space utilized and possibly realize some revenue from the additional capacity, or do we have to kind of build that capacity and just sit on it ourselves?
Well, in terms of increasing the capacity currently, we're not actually increasing it by a lot more than current. So apologies, there's an error in the paper that I corrected with the elected members yesterday. The current capacity of the kennel is 42 kennels, and we would be looking to take it up to 52, although 8 of those are isolation kennels that sort of need to be kept separate as a requirement of the code. So really we're only increasing the number by 2. That being said, we have looked to build this facility with potential expansion in mind in the future, both whether just the city increases accordingly or whether maybe in the future we did change the way we delivered the service and maybe we did partner with somebody. Whatever that may look like, there's room for a whole new kennel block. There's a small provision for some increase in staff numbers on site. And also a little bit of extra yard space as well. So that future potential expansion could occur at any time, and really that's given us a little bit of flexibility to make sure we only have to build this once.
Thank you. Finally, the value engineering side of things, was there any value engineering done around the number of car parks? I see there's something like 17 allowed there, and I think our current facility has a rather smaller number than 17.
Definitely. We did consider that. I mean, ultimately, the savings from changing the car parking area was very minimal. We could half the number of car parks, and we're probably saving 10 grand. The yard within the facility, we did change to chip seal, so we did decidedly scale that back, which did get us a reasonable saving. But yeah, in terms of the car parks at the front, I mean, we could look at that, but it would be very minimal change.
Thank you, Bryce. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Bryce. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one, just on page 40, just looking at sort of the floor plan there, and I'm just thinking about this being an animal shelter. Like, it's very predominant in terms of kennels. Is there a facility there for other animal types in there?
Good question, and I'm not sure if I'm necessarily the right one to answer that. Yeah, well, we've called them kennels or animal spaces, if you will. You know, and whilst in the immediate sense we're catering towards dogs, that's not to say that some of those spaces might not be able to cater for other animals. But I might need to hand over to Ross in our animal control area to talk to that a little bit more.
Thank you.
Morning, Council. Ross McDermott, Team Leader, Animal Control. At the moment, we have stock paddocks which sit next to the current pound, and they will still be maintained in the new facility. Other animals that we've had in the past have been normally poultry, which have been held while trying to locate owners or find another home for them. They've normally been held in our current puppy pens or smaller dog kennels away from where dogs are. And it could be that this is done in one of the other kennels that are in the new facility.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, perhaps I'm thinking perhaps of, goats and pigs and things like that. That may, in fact, actually, we might come across from time to time.
Well, the paddocks which are adjacent to the facility that you can't see on the plan, they're adjacent to that. They are relatively substantial in size. They're fully fenced. They are meeting the requirements of livestock. So there's no reason why that couldn't continue and cover everything from sheep to cows to goats to llamas and everything in between.
Great, thank you. Just moving on to perhaps a line of questioning that started with Councillor Johnson, just in terms of third-party options that we perhaps have considered or looked at. What kind of institutions might we have around sort of the Palmerston North area that might fit the bill?
Well, we have a number of private kennels and catteries who pretty much all of we approached back in 2019. There's the SPCA, of course, who we spoke to at the time. We did speak, as I said, to the neighbouring TAs as well. Outside of that, we tried to canvass it pretty long and hard in 2019 to cover as many options as we could in that space.
So just on that, in terms of the animal welfare legislation, say for example, if we did find notionally another organisation who would fulfil this requirement for us, ultimately, if there is a breach, who is responsible?
It's a really good question. I think, firstly, it would just be worth pointing out that there's no existing private facilities that would essentially be able to do what we would need to do in addition to their everyday business. So there would need to be quite a considerable capital investment into any facility, whether that come from private or come from council and do somebody else's facility would need to be determined, and what that would look like, I don't know. In terms of who would be liable of a breach, I suppose that would come down to the joint venture type arrangement that we entered into. It may be a shared breach, or it could be on the owner of the facility. Until we've worked that out, it's very difficult to answer that question.
I might be sort of extending this a little bit further, but I guess liability would be very much dependent upon the complexity of the legal document that actually governed the arrangement, yes?
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Bryce.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Bryce, can I understand when we'd gone through the value engineering, which is on our order paper, page 34, how many of the blocks did we reduce down from 4 metres square to 3 metres square? Was it the 36, was it 44, or was it the total 52?
Blocks A and B we reduced in size, so C, the third block, I guess, sequentially on the map was already at 3 square metres, and basically what we did is we reduced down A and B, taking them down from 4 square metres to 3.
So 44 kennel blocks, 44 kennel blocks. That's what it works out, 36
yep,
plus 8 is 44.
Yeah, correct.
And so therefore the second bullet point where you're saying that we've estimated savings of 44 square metres is 670,000 there. Is that a typo there? Because that works out to be 15,200 a square metre. That's Is there a typo in that?
No. I mean, this is, when we get to the specialty bit of the facility, I mean, this is the bit that requires the most technical input and design. And by changing that and reducing that, it affected a whole variety of things, from how it interacted with the drainage and the set-out, through to the roof capacity and loading, the walls, the number of doors and gates. So it's not a typo, it was just a very big sum of money.
Well, I've added up all those sums of money that have taken out of the value engineering, and it comes to 1.33 million. So you're suggesting to us that initially, on top of the 7.3, the figures were coming up at 8.65 million.
If we had done no value engineering whatsoever and just based it on the design, you would have been faced with a figure of that magnitude, yes.
You mentioned that you're really confident that we've got the lowest price possible. Straight after the report hit the media, I had a GM from a local manufacturing company for panels saying that he was shocked by the proposed cost and that he's since provided an alternate price for the works. Has that been considered? He's a local manufacturer, evidently, and...
So a number of those items, obviously we were in the middle of a tender process when that comes. So all of those kind of people that jumped in, we referred them off to the tenderers. And majority of, there were a few similar situations, I guess is what I'm saying, where people were also offering up their services and products, and the tenderers were working through those both with them. I'm not sure exactly who you're referring to, but there was at least 3 or 4 that I saw that we referred off to both tenderers, and a number of those changes were incorporated into the tender price.
Okay. And just to understand just how different the 15.2 square metre, 15,200 to build a square metre of what we've saved, I'm just using that figure to go across the whole project of the rest of the kennels. You're in the building sector, can you tell me how much the average price is to build a residential home per square metre? Have you got an idea of what that might sit at?
I'm trying to think of the
If
best answer.
If I said many builders are working around 3,000 a square metre, would you accept that?
It's definitely there or thereabouts. I was trying to consider the best answer for you. A lot of it comes down to scale and quantity, what kind of house you're looking to build. I mean, there are some examples, for instance, around my personal neighbourhood where that's been up around 4,500 a square metre.
Okay, I could even accept that. Okay, 4,500, and we're talking about savings of 15,000 a square metre. Okay, I'm happy to say from 3 to 4.5. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Bryce, and thanks also for the additional questions that were answered. Just looking at the ongoing costs for running the animal shelter into the future, if we're to invest in the way that's been outlined in the paper, for the interest costs and the debt reduction costs, obviously that will increase the costs of running the shelter quite significantly. Just at a rough estimate, based on the dog numbers that we've currently going through, it looks like it might be around $250 to $300 per night per dog. And I'm just wondering, with private kennels, people book them in for about $18 a night. And I'm just wondering, what is it that private providers are doing that obviously must still meet the code, that they can provide that service for so much less than what the council would be able to provide that?
Excuse me, 2 seconds, Councillor. Apologies, councillor. A very good question. I suppose there's a number of factors that could feed into that. To choose a short-term stay for a kennel or a cattery in the private market is a choice. So you have market forces potentially at play there as well. So they need to be competitive with each other. Whereas I suppose we do not have that luxury a lot of the time. We're forcefully acquiring dogs or other animals. The other thing, I guess, to consider, we are relatively consistent with other councils around what we're charging per night. And the cost per night also factors in other parts of the service as well. It's not just a dog staying and feeding it, for instance. It does, we have staff costs and other things around the acquisition of them in the first place.
So in terms of looking forward, has there been any consideration of how those additional costs would be recovered? Would the view be that they would be recovered by additional fees or through general rates or a mixture?
Well, the interest costs on borrowing the money to build the facility obviously won't kick in straight away anyway. We'll be waiting until we've finished the facility. This council currently funds the service partly through rates and partly through fees and charges. Whilst council regularly reviews those fees and charges, it would probably be impractical to be increasing that to the magnitude to cover the entire cost for that, so therefore the rates funded portion as a consequence would probably have to increase.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the dogs the animals that come to the animal shelter, do we have an understanding of the percentage of how many of them are unregistered versus registered?
Ross might call you up for that, do you know?
And are there different charges for unregistered dogs?
I'll just hand over to our Ross and Animal Control.
Ross McDermott, Animal Control. In terms of dogs coming in registered to unregistered, we're through staff efforts, we're starting to see more registered dogs come through, whereas in the past they've been unregistered.
And if someone wants to come and pick up their dog, if it's unregistered, are the charges more than if they're picking up a dog that is registered?
Only through other legal requirements. So a dog can't leave the pound unless it's registered and microchipped. And then there's the impounding fees and the daily charge.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of that answers that question, thank you. In terms of the current capacity, the chart on page 32 outlines the average number of dogs per month and the average length of stay and that sort of thing. How often is the current shelter full to capacity? Like, do we ever have a situation where there's no room for a new animal that arrives?
Possibly also another question for Ross. I guess what I would say is over the last couple of years through COVID and things, that has probably not given a true reflection, hence the chart in 2.17 going all the way back multiple years to try and show that. But Ross, I'm happy to hand over for you if you've got any additional information to that. But I mean, ultimately the stay numbers, as you can see, have been outlined in that table.
In my 9 years in the industry, I've never seen the pound in a state where we can't accept more dogs in. Something to keep in mind there is if we get a sick dog, we do need to be able to manage that through either moving that dog to another kennel space away from other ones, which the current facility isn't very good at. Yeah, so there have been a few times in the last couple of years where there's been dogs housed closer than we would like to other animals.
Okay. Thank you. And in terms of the length, average length of stay, 9 days is quite long. Obviously, that's quite a bit more than previous years. Is there anything that's being done currently to try and reduce the length of stay?
Pretty much what you said there. I'll let you talk to it.
So the length of time that a dog's in the shelter is highly dependent on whether the owner comes forward and their ability to pay the fees when they do come forward. Where owners don't come forward, we have to give 7 days for them to claim the dog, or 10 days if we know who the owner is. That just allows the notice period and delivery of that. For example, if we've got had a dog for 4 days, the owner comes forward, we then need to give them written notice of impound, which is 10 days, and that means that council would hold that dog for a minimum of 14 days.
Okay, thank you. I'm nearly there, Mr Mayor. Just in terms of the size that was outlined, the current one being 436 square metres and the proposed new one being 781 square metres, obviously that's quite a big increase in size. What is the percentage of the new area that's allocated to animals versus staff?
2 seconds.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is where the increase, that's almost double the size, is that doubling the size of the dog areas and doubling the size of the staff areas, or is it, how is that additional space been allocated?
Well, of the new facility, the office area, which also includes the reception and things like that, is only about 136, 140 square metres. So exactly what that percentage works out to be
Okay.
footprint-wise, but I think it would be fair to say the vast majority is animal-related.
Okay. And just coming back to the capacity, if in the 9 years it's never been full, and that was with 42 kennels, why do we need 52? I realise there's the isolation ones, but the 8 isolation kennels, can they be used to keep a dog in if there is additional capacity needed? Or do they just have to sit empty unless there's a need for an isolation kennel?
Well, their primary function is to be separating out sick dogs or new dogs to the facility that need to be isolated. If we found ourselves in a situation where they were being full-time occupied by dogs and we had new dogs coming into the facility, then ultimately that area of the facility wouldn't be operating as intended.
Okay, and sorry, just one final question. The paper that I went back to from February 2020, when the 4 options were outlined to that was presented to the Finance and Audit Committee, the 3rd or 4th option that related to partnering with other councils, the discussion with MDC was that the reason that they didn't want to engage in partnership was that they already had a facility that met the code. And so I was trying to understand why that meant that they wouldn't want to go into some partnership. I'm not sure what the question was that was being asked of Manawatu District at the time, but do we understand whether they have any additional capacity in their facility at present?
Well, I was in the room for majority of those discussions with MDC at the time, and it was a very broad-ranging conversation with them around services, capacity, where their capacity levels were at, where we believed we would be going to, the size of the facility, whether it could indeed be working for both parties if we were looking to pool resources together, the level of investment that would need to therefore take place at their facility, and ultimately on balance after those conversations, and I can't remember the exact conversation, apologies, a few years ago now, but it, ultimately from their standpoint, they felt their facility was adequate for their current pool, and they were not, did not believe that it would be practical to be combining the two facilities without considerable investment, which they weren't willing to do.
Okay, and so there hasn't been any further discussion with them in that 3-year period to update that position?
Not since council made the decision to proceed with the new facility.
Okay, thank you.
All right, councillors, we've got 8 of you in the queue again. So if we can keep those questions precise, otherwise we're going to be here all day. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Bryce. Now, just a couple of questions. Firstly, yard time. How long is each dog given yard time each day?
We aim to give each dog in our care at minimum half an hour once a day.
Half an hour. Okay. Now, I'm going to go down to this, taking back the 4 square metres to the 3 square metres. As an owner of a big dog, that interests me, because I know my dog would go berserk in a 3 square metres space. I see we've got 4 kennels there for small dogs, and we've got 35 other kennels. I look at A12, A11, B11, B12, C1011, or it could be D1011. Are they bigger, or is it just an optical illusion?
Yes, so the first kennel in Block A is bigger.
Yeah.
So that definitely is a bigger one. All of the other kennels are 3 square metres. Probably the one thing I would point out is the small dogs pen is actually 4 on top, so there's actually 8 of them.
Okay.
And the kennel number A12 and A11, B12 and D11 are still 4 square metres, so they are a little bit bigger.
They are 4 square metres. So how many, we've got 4 larger ones for larger dogs?
Correct. Well, 8 total.
8. 8 at 4 square metres.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwell online.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions were around, I guess, future capacity of the animal shelter. And I see the chart on page 32, but I'm just wondering if you're having more reports on or more evidence around increased dog ownership in the city, and whether you think that will affect future numbers as well. I mean, just as an example, I note that during COVID times, quite a lot of my friends ended up getting puppies. And so I'm just wondering if that is actually a real statistic, or is that just a anecdotal thing?
Well, we are definitely seeing increases in the number of dog owners year on year, and that's been quite consistent for some time.
Okay. So with this facility, are you confident that this would be able to hold the capacity of I guess, future needs of the animal shelter, given that I know that with dog ownership, that doesn't necessarily, end up meaning that more dogs will end up in the animal shelter. But are you confident that this is kind of future-proof for that, and we won't need to, go back and build more in a few years' time?
So a bit of a twofold answer to that. In terms of the current capacity, yes, we are confident that the current capacity in the plan will meet the sort of immediate and short-term requirements of the city, maybe even the medium term. As you'll see on the plan, there is a area that has been allowed for a future kennel block. So at some point in the future, should we get to a space where the dog ownership or number of animals being seen through this facility, and maybe if there was a genuine demand for a different kind of animal, there is definitely an opportunity within the facility to be building a new kennel block there that will again help to future-proof us moving forward.
Cool. So I guess my second question on that then is, once we've built this facility, would there then be the option to potentially partner with someone like MDC in the future for an extra block if that was needed?
Never say never.
Excellent. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got 3 questions left. In that reconfiguration, in the design, is there a possibility if in the future we needed bigger kennels that you could have a slight, like you could make 2 kennels, one's, have a sort of a division between them that you could remove them?
Yes, so in my comment earlier, as part of that design, we have designed it in a way that we could, in theory, look to reconfigure it again in the future. Should we have the trend show us we need a considerably more amount of bigger kennels, or maybe the welfare code changed. And there's a number of ways we could do that. We might be able to just simply move the walls over. In some cases, we could potentially cut a wall out in between. So yeah, there's a number of different ways we could do that.
I just wondered if there was anything that you could do with this design so that it's, like in motels, they open the doors if they need just something simple where you could have a sliding gate where you can have 3 metres now, a 6 metre pen for...
Well, we could, but I would say that would add cost to the design because we'd be moving away from a more standard rigid wall.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, what is a dog enrichment shelter?
When the public, and Ross, I'll let you build on this or correct me if I get this wrong, one of the key components of the facility is we're looking to rehome dogs. So basically for that area, that's where the public would be interacting with potential new dogs. There is a covered structure shown on there. It's actually more of a sort of pergola-y type thing, just to sort of...
No, I understand from previous. And my last question is, you've got a $30,000 saving to replace concrete with commercial vinyl. Will that have an increased cost in maintenance later on, and the wear of vinyl and the actual keeping it clean and everything? Is that sort of a false cost?
It will increase the cost over its life, because obviously polished concrete has a much longer life. But we have gone for a very hard-wearing vinyl, very commercial, industrial scoped vinyl. So yes, it will, but I wouldn't say it will add a considerable amount of cost to the operating expense for that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go Councillor Butt first, because he hasn't been in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure who to ask this question. This question is not related to this project, but obviously this discussion. And I understand that sometimes asking question does help, but has somebody ever calculated the expense of the whole council meeting, and has somebody ever calculated the expense per hour or per minute we are doing here?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. So what's your point?
My point is, sometimes we ask questions, the answer we already know. And it's just, I feel that's wastage of time.
That's a matter of opinion.
Thank you.
And it is a comment, so please, Councillor, if you want to go down that track, just leave it to comments. All right. Continuing the questions, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce and Ross. We've focused a lot on cost and on the dogs. There hasn't been much discussion about staff safety, and I'm aware, it's not really mentioned in the paper, but I'm aware from previous papers that staff safety both from dangerous dogs and aggressive owners, is an issue. Can you just explain the current risks to staff in the current premises, both from dogs and people, and how that is going to be mitigated with the new premise?
So in terms of the current risks that staff face at the moment, in our current reception area, all that divides us from the angry customers is your aluminium screen door that you would have on the outside of your house. So they're quite easily broken. In terms of handling and bringing dogs into the facility or moving them, dangerous dogs are normally moved using a catch pole. At the moment, we have to walk them through the reception area, through a narrow space, on slippery floors and into a kennel. Currently, we have 3 kennels which are suitable for housing a dangerous dog, where we can exercise them without interacting with them. Quite often, we'll have more than 3 dangerous dogs in at one time.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of dogs being injured in the current premises, I recall when and it was probably before your time, but I recall when elected members went for a visit to the pound, there was some discussion about dogs being injured in the pound as it is, or as it was then, certainly. Can you give us a feel for how dangerous the pound is for dogs at the moment?
I know some work was done a few years back in terms of the caging that we had to remove any sharp points on that and square them off. My main concern at the moment in the current facility is the transference of animal diseases.
So there's no isolation facility currently, is there?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, there was just an officer comment there at the back to one of your questions, Councillor.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd just like to add that one of the main advantages of this design is it would, from a health and safety perspective, is it would allow all the staff and the team to be based at the facility, thereby offering additional safety for each staff member.
Thanks, Kerry Lee. All right, Councillor Mickelard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Bryce, for what has been a very clear report and presentation. I think many of my questions have already been answered or asked by my colleagues, but one question that actually stands for me is the fact that we have 2 recommendations coming, as you probably be aware, that seeks to explore options to deliver animal shelter services through other arrangements such as partnership and outsourcing. And maybe to help me make my decision, you've mentioned here in the report that there was no interest from potential partners for outsourcing the project. Can you give us that certainty?
Well, that speaks to some of the comments I made in my opening comment. We engage with a large number, if not all, of the private kennels and catteries in the city. We explored all of the opportunities with our neighbouring councils, majority of which are too far away to essentially be able to do a joint facility, with the exception of Manawatu District Council. I guess all I can say to try and give the elected members some confidence there is they were a series of robust discussions. They were looking at what would be required from a new facility, what would be required from a capacity sense, the ability to grow, flex, expand as the city continued to grow and the need grew. It looked at the ongoing ability to not only comply with the welfare changes now, but should there be any future ones, would they be able to change accordingly? And As the result of those conversations, ultimately, majority of the facilities would not be able to, and there was about 2 private facilities that in theory might have, but they had no interest, and they were quite clear in that.
Thank you.
And Councillor Dennison. I hope
Thank you,
this is
Mr
the
Mayor.
last
This is
question.
on the, more the operational side of it, not so much the kennel side. How many staff do we currently have that are rangers working in animal control?
There's 4 field staff, and myself in the office,
Okay, 4 field staff, including you or plus you in the office?
plus me.
Okay. And how regularly, just as operation goes, that they're all there at the same time? All 4 ranger staff?
Most days, all 4 rangers are at work and on duty.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, well, but because of the space in the current pound, there's not room for us all to be based there.
Okay, thank you. And then, I'm happy, and then, so I'm just working out the car park. Bryce, you kind of, in earlier questions, you kind of said, no, that wouldn't cost extra lot. And I'm just counted 14 car parks, 4 staff, plus an administrator, and then we've got 10 people picking up their dog at once. No, I'm just trying to, or, 9 or 10. So you said the car parks wouldn't cost a lot. Is that something, if we weren't to approve this budget, I guess that's something that would have to just be rationalised and
Essentially, so the area within the facility, which I think on the plan it's marked Ranger vehicle parking and circulation, that is to cope for the staff currently and future. The car parks out the front would be for, yes, public interaction. We're talking about sort of a bit of hard surface there, really. We could reduce some of that, but as I said, I think it would be a very minimal cost improvement.
Okay, happy with that. And just lastly, finally, Mr Mayor, the meeting spaces, I know it's indicative, but it's got 10 people meeting around a table. Can I understand why a meeting space for that large, and how often would that get used?
There's a standard symbol that gets used for meeting spaces, and it was put in there accordingly.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you.
That's been an hour of questioning. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move the recommendation, please. Seconded by Councillor McLeod.
Yeah, I was going to as well, Councillor. So,
Mr.
as
Mayor,
the chair, I will look to move it. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McLeod.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I think that's not procedurally correct. I moved it and it was seconded. You can't vacate my moving.
Sorry, Councillor, you butted in, and I didn't go to you. You butted in.
Okay, well, I would like to call standing order to challenge the ruling of the chair. Then, in that case.
Are you serious?
Yes, I am. I am. You did that, and I didn't think that was correct.
We're just checking the procedure. Councillor, just going through the standing orders, the Chair's ruling stands. You can challenge that again through a procedural motion if you wish to. That is your decision.
That's what I've indicated I would like to do. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Do you have a seconder?
I'll call for a seconder and we'll see if there is one.
There is none. Thank you. We will move forward. So, councillors, we have the new animal shelter building increased to budget. It has been well questioned. Thank you to the officers there. Pretty thorough report. I'm gathering everyone is quite disappointed at where we are, but we have to make a decision. So we have the recommendation there that Council increase the overall budget of Programme 1552, Animal Shelter New Building, by 2.8 million. This increases the overall budget from 4.5 million to 7.3 million plus GST. As such, the following budgets will be required in 2022-23 and 23-24 financial years. A being 22-23 year of 4.5 million and B 2023-24 year of 2.2 million plus GST, noting that there is a carry forward of 1.7 million plus GST from the 21-22 financial year. That's moved by myself as the Chair and seconded by Councillor Mickelard. Thank you. I'll speak to it first, councillors, before opening it up for comment. Look, we simply don't have a choice. I'm really disappointed of how we've got ourselves into this position, and that was well teased out by questions. But simply, we cannot afford to do nothing. It's as simple as that. I'm disappointed in the cost escalation, and as an organisation, we should have set some expectations about what the true budget was. And I'll just go through that in a moment. The thing I am concerned about is we didn't look at some other options or explore them, extinguish them, and then still come back to the build-only option. I'm disappointed officers haven't gone back to others around us, especially we're in a year of reforms where the local government reform is actually asking us to do more and more shared services. And I really question at times whether we should be doing the design and build of these projects with such escalations. We started this process with the original estimate in late 2019 and 2.1. We then got to February 2020, clearly wasn't right, but we then went to 2.9 million in February 2022. There was a proper cost estimate of the project, put us to 4.5 million in early 2021. And then now we're at June 2023 at 7.3 million. So hence the amount of questions that were asked of the officers. So it's more than tripled in value. And I believe when it had doubled, it should have at least had a ruler run over it. Were other TAs interested? Was there other external options, especially in the price escalation? Look, it may have still come back to the build option, but the fact that that hadn't been carried out is a flaw in the system. But look, it is what it is. We absolutely have no choice. I appreciate that some councillors are really struggling with the increase. I am as well, and I'm pretty well over these cost escalations. I know there's been COVID, I know there's been build cost increases, but we've tripled the value of this particular facility. I'll leave it at that. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this recommendation, but I just want to give indication that if this fails, I'd like to move to alternate recommendations, and I'd like to just outline that now so that elected members do have an understanding that there is another option other than what's in front of them. That is outlined on the screen now, that additional budget for an animal shelter is not approved, and that the Chief Executive reports back on options to reduce the cost of an animal shelter, and that the Chief Executive explores options to deliver animal shelter services through other arrangements, such as partnerships and outsourcing, and report back to Council. Now, Mr Mayor, you've just outlined your disappointment that officers haven't gone back to other providers and explored other options. I think it's reasonable that officers haven't done this because Council hasn't given that direction. I think the only direction to date that this Council has given was in February 2020 when the majority of this Council gave direction for a new build. And unless we specifically ask officers to explore other options, I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect that they just go and explore that. So these recommendations that I would propose as a backup would give the opportunity for officers to go back and explore those options. Now, looking at those 4 options that were outlined in February 2020, it's reasonable to understand why Council may have voted to proceed with a new build at that time, as the estimate was 2.9 million. I think when costs escalate to the point that they have, and is what is outlined in this paper, I think it's extremely reasonable to go back to the drawing board and say, do we proceed on this basis, or do we actually check if there are other options? This resolution would actually look to reduce would be also asking to look at options to reduce the cost of an animal shelter, and I just want to outline my reasons for that. The numbers in this paper of average occupancy and the average length of stay makes our current occupancy 17%, based on 42 kennels and 30 days of the year, when we've got an average of 24 dogs per month and an average of 9 days per month. That's 17% occupancy. Even at the maximum monthly average, the maximum month of 48 dogs per month, then that would make a 34% occupancy. So I do really question why we are increasing the capacity to the size that's outlined in this paper. The nearly doubling the square meterage when as we've heard today, in 9 years the officer has not experienced the current capacity being full and needing to find somewhere for an animal to go somewhere else. So there's another thing, in looking at these numbers, I do think it seems rather absurd sort of cost to be investing when looking at the average capacity and looking at our current costs, and then adding into that once it's built and we've got the full interest costs and debt repayment, we're looking at $2,500 per dog visit. And when you break that down for 9 nights, that's around $270 a night. We could put these dogs up in 5-star hotel for less than that. I'm not suggesting that's what we should do, but I'm just making a point to say these costs are just out of hand. When private providers can kennel a dog for $18 a day, why is it costing us $270 or more a night to house these dogs? I think that is reason enough for us to go back to the drawing board and ask a few more questions before we press go on what seems an excessive amount of money to spend.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We could probably move residents from the hospital into hotels for cheaper as well, but we're not doing that. In regards to the report and the information that's come to us around the new animal shelter, first of all, I just want to acknowledge the staff. I think through this process, the focus on the value engineering, the design revision, and actually the real efforts to reduce the cost are so apparent. It is so obvious that there has been a real focus to try to get this down. And so I just want to acknowledge that the shock around the price tag isn't just around the council table. It is very clearly within staff as well, and they have done their best. I really believe that. Look, I think we don't want our reputation as a city to be one that doesn't care about or prioritise animal welfare. And that really seems to be the tone of some of the questions that have been asked today and the indication around not going ahead with this at this stage. I'm supporting the recommendations, and not just reluctantly, but actually I see that this overall is a solution to our non-compliance. So I'm voting for this to address that non-compliance, to get that status changed with the Animal Welfare Code and those breaches. But also I'm voting for this to prioritise staff health and safety while at work, particularly because staff are working with potentially dangerous or actually very unwell animals that come through that facility. And currently I don't see a way where we are looking after our staff to keep them safe from that harm that could be there. But also I'm voting for a facility that doesn't put animals in our city at risk, either from each other or from the facility itself. And so I think that this is a program that we need to accept that in the current environment, there are cost increases across the board. This is not within an animal shelter. This is within infrastructure. This is within operations for various programs. We are not really taken by surprise by the cost increase. So I think that this is a program that we need to accept. We need to get on and address the issues, because I would suggest that if we don't, then MPI may seriously consider some level of prosecution, and we don't want to be a test case for this. So I would encourage you all to support it.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add my voice onto the conversation, I think the reason why I'm supporting this is because the risks to the organisation cannot be understated. And there are reputational risks for non-compliance. And also, when we look at the fines and the regime around the fines for non-compliance, the risks are just too great for the organisation, and I think we should go into sums of millions of dollars. Council may, it's been clear in the report, the fines under the Animal Welfare Act, that council may incur breach notices and incur financial fines for operating a facility that does not meet the Code of Welfare standards. The new shelter is essential. And the only reason why we haven't been called out by MPI so far is because, the reason why we haven't been called out by MPI so far for being in breach of the code is simply because planning was already underway to remedy this issue. And because we'd also indicated, or by our actions, that would have a fully compliant facility soon, or underway. As we've seen also from the staff's report, which actually highlights, I think in 2.10, that MPI acknowledged that council had already made some improvement, but made it clear that the council must have a compliant facility. And that's the only reason why MPI hasn't called us out. And I think for us, it will be very much, we'll be doing ourselves, we cannot afford to delay the work around us anymore. Or otherwise, we'd like to see the bill amount even further as construction costs increase and continue to increase. So I will urge and encourage us to support this because we'll be doing ourselves a disservice if we stop the work now and not allow this to go forward. So I urge you all to support this.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The increased cost is absolutely abominable. I would never have imagined it when we first went there 3.5 or 3 years ago, and we had a look at it and we all decided this is not acceptable. We can't carry on keeping animals in this sort of condition. It was going to be $2.5–3 million, and we said, oh, we better do this and we better do that. So we went into the council's favourite sport of procrastination, and here we are now 3.5 years later with what was $2.5 million, now being $7 million. And would you believe it? We've got people wanting to procrastinate a little bit longer. And let's put it off for more reports, and maybe another 2 years' time, We might have $14 million. I don't want to see it growing anymore. I would like to see us forget about procrastinating and get on with the work and get the job done. And as far as $18 a night in a private kennel, can someone please tell me where they are? None of them will take my dog at $18 a night. I'd love to know. It's a lot cheaper than that. Maybe we've got a little wee miniature like this, it's $18, but my girl's not. Councillors, let's not procrastinate any longer. Let's get on with this and get it done. Bite the bullet. We didn't do it 3.5 years ago when we should have. It's cost us, what, $5 million? What, do you want to carry on and build another $5 million on it? Let's get it done now. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to add a great deal to what's already been said. I'm actually going to support the build of the animal shelter, and as per Councillor Finlay, I don't think we can afford to procrastinate anymore. The point I really want to make is that legislatively we are required to be compliant, and by giving that or thinking that a third party might be able to do that for us does not exonerate us from our responsibility, our accountability to ensure that we are compliant in terms of animal welfare, because that is vicarious liability. You could not construct a legal document strong enough to actually exonerate ourselves from that responsibility. So any more delays, any notional thought that we might actually have a third party who might be able to save us a couple of $1 million is ludicrous. So let's just get on with it and build it and get it over and done with. Thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm speaking in full support of the recommendations in front of us, and it's not because I like the idea of spending this amount of money at all. It does make me uncomfortable to see how much cost escalation we face, but not nearly as uncomfortable as I was the day that we visited the current facility. I don't think I'm particularly squeamish or kind of, vulnerable to that kind of stuff, but in leaving that facility and on reflection, I was somewhere between uncomfortable and unwell as I thought back about the sorts of conditions that we were forcing sentient being, companion animals into, as well as the very substandard working conditions for our employees. And probably the most disturbing thing to me is that it's taken us this long to finally get to the point of having a solution that we can move forward with. I'd like to particularly acknowledge and thank staff and management for bringing us a very full picture of what is needed here by way of cost and by way of design to get there. To be honest, I think we've probably gone a little bit far in some cases of the value engineering to probably, we might see our operating and maintenance costs go up as a result, but I'm prepared to support what's here. I guess the point I'd like to make is it would have been far easier for them to bring us half the budget or 3/4 of the budget, and I think there's been times in the past where kind of that easier path has been taken, and we've found that, the project that we thought we signed off on suddenly needs another $1 million, and that's so we can build the walls. And then 6 months later, it needs another $1 million so we can get the roof on it. Here we have a comprehensive and full cost that we can get behind and support, and I want to thank staff for enduring a bit of a lion's den of questions around that today, and what was quite a comprehensive time spent in questions. I think for me the enduring lesson here is really around, as Councillor Finlay said, we should get on with things as soon as possible. The best time to do this was obviously years ago, and the reason we're facing the costs now is because of those delays. So I look forward to this project getting underway and knowing that we have an animal facility that we can be proud of in the future.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And just for public record, I'm going to second the alternate recommendations in the name of Councillor Naylor. And And speaking to that, so animal welfare, everyone would agree, I think we need to do something, but not at any cost. And what this has done is got out of hand, and what it's showing is us being out of touch. So some comparisons, when we're looking at the build costs of what's the value engineering showing, reducing 44 kennel blocks, that averages out at 15,200 a square metre. When the average residential property can be built between 3,000 and up to 4.5 acceptably, it's a pretty high spec build, a square metre. That's 3.3 to 5 times more than building a residential property. I can't understand how it can be so much more. The cost, therefore, after it starts working out, as Councillor Naylor's calculated, at $250 a night, with the average 9-night stay of being, we'll just foot in a bill for $2,250 odd. That's in some cases how much people pay for the annual rates. And what that's covering is an average length stay for a dog in the new shelter. And they have to save and pay their whole year's rates and understand that and scrimp and save and not buy the extra loaf of bread sometimes Councillor Finlay uses. So the dog can stay in an Airbnb. Or was it an Air DOG, or was it the Bark Royal? I mentioned last time that this seems like a palace. I cannot get my head around the fact that it's more than just your average hotel stay. This is out of touch, as I mentioned before, and I'm not going to stand here and say that this is okay. I've had an email, and I've mentioned that a local manufacturer here in the city was shocked to hear the cost of the project, and has subsequently provided alternate costings for the panels. And even the officer was mentioning there's been a response of other people offering alternate products. So I think it's a little bit pick and mix. I understand this product's shipped in from Australia, so there's extra freight and all the additional costs of that. Instead of having local money in our local economy going around and doing something local, that also concerns me. And then finally, when you look at the timing, when I understand the state of homelessness and the cost of living and how tough this is, to be putting on a dog shelter at $7.2 million, I can't accept the additional cost to get it up that high. When we first approved this, it's quite right, it's had a storybook of 2.9 or whatever it was, up to 4.1 to 4.5, and even then I was struggling with it, to be honest, at those type of figures, but not at 7.2 upwards, and I'm not going to put my name to it, and I'm clearly opposed to it, but let's not get around the fact that we're not opposing animal welfare. I think that is very important, but again, as I started, not at any cost. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dingwell, online.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think if we'd had a bit more time, then we might be able to actually argue down the prices, or we might be able to find partners, or we might be able to, delay a bit more. But quite frankly, we are out of time. This animal shelter has been non-compliant for 4 years now. And I'm actually a little bit gutted because I remember when I first started in council, I remember Councillor Johnson saying, as soon as possible, if we could get an animal shelter compliant as soon as possible, that would be ideal. And it turns out as soon as possible is now. And that's just because of all of the issues with COVID and all of the issues with price escalations and all of the issues with trying to get tenderers in the first place. It is what it is. And sometimes things just cost what they cost. Right now, the animal shelter is non-compliant. The reputational damage on that alone should be enough to, scare a few councillors into getting something done. Like, I am genuinely concerned about what's going to appear in the papers tomorrow because, we are looking at being the council that has a non-compliant animal shelter and is okay with that, which I think is completely ridiculous. The costs of non-compliance is huge. Councillor Johnson already said that it was around approximately 250K for every offence. That alone is a big number. There will be increased costs if we delay this any further than we already have. Bryce was saying 200K for redesign if we go down that road, at the very least. That's if we manage to get another tenderer to come to the party in the first place. I've heard comments around things like private kennels, but from my understanding, private kennels do not take sick dogs, and they do not take dogs with behavioural issues. And this animal shelter is specifically designed to cater for that, because these are the animals that don't end up going to private kennels. So, yeah, the new shelter will be better for the animals. It'll be heaps better for the staff. I agree with comments around the value engineering. I almost feel like that's gone a bit too tight, but again, it is what it is. Staff have already managed to shave a huge amount off that 7 mil. That could have been a lot higher if they hadn't done that extreme, and I would say extreme value engineering. So I think, enough's enough. We already have a non-compliant animal shelter, and we just need to get on and build the thing. And if we end up having partners later down the line that might be interested in, expanding our services, then we could build some extra bits, and work on that. But right now, no one's going to partner with us because we don't even have a compliant animal shelter. So, yeah, it's time we just get on and did it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, for your comments, and I think you've very ably covered the very many very good reasons why we need to get on with this project as soon as possible. I have been repeatedly disappointed by the attempts to stall this project, delay it, and it seems to me like every couple of weeks we're coming back to discuss it again. Council made a really clear decision in February 2020, in principle, to go with the new build, and reaffirmed that again in February 2021 when the design came back to us. In my opinion, it's been slow. I wanted this to happen a lot longer. And like many of you, I will never forget the day we went to look round the pound. I mean, I was really shocked. There's just no doubt. There's just no other way to say it. Staff have been working in that pound all of the time in between, while we've been sitting here chewing the fat about how many nights the dog spends in the kennels and how many dogs go through the kennels and how much a square foot is to build. It's like Groundhog Day to me, discussing the same arguments again and again and again. And the facts remain that this facility does not meet the regulatory requirements for us to be able to be compliant with the law as it stands under the Animal Welfare Act. And no amount of mitigation, of putting in extra heating, of trying to, separate sick dogs out within the same kennel block because we don't have an isolation facility, none of that goes to actually meet the needs of the animals that we are keeping in that shelter. There's 9,021 dog owners in this city. I really would dread to think if they got a look around the pound what they would have to say. And yet at the same time, we've got councillors sitting around this table wanting to delay the project further. A good business case was done. Time was taken to speak to people who might be able to partner with us. We were open to that idea. We looked at whether or not we could refurb the current premises. The feasibility was done properly and thoroughly. And to be going around in circles now at this stage and saying that we need to do that all over again, I just found it incredible, honestly, incredible. Not to mention all of the other issues around staff safety. I doubt there's very many of you around this table that have had to deal with a dangerous dog. I have, and the officers sitting up there have, and it's not fun. It's not fun at all. And the owners are often even more dangerous, let me tell you. And we need to be providing adequate facilities for our staff as well as for animals. And this, to me, is an essential service. We're obligated to provide it under the Dog Control Act, and we're obligated to do it well. So I don't think there should be any debate about going further with this. Yes, there's been price escalations. Every project that comes before us at the moment now is a price escalation. And not just us, every council in the country. And the reasons why have been, thoroughly canvassed by very many people. So I'm not going to go into that. Just ask you to please support this now. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I too support this, and I'm not going to go into what councillors have already commented on. I think because there's been some really odd comments about this project, I think it would be one that we should audit and as a project come through the finance and audit and just have a look at why it stalled and things like that. Just to give it the tick that we know that the processes were followed, because there's sort of some indications that processes weren't right, but I don't agree with that. So I'd like to see that project come through the finance and audit committees to get it ticked off. The only comment that I would like to make is around this $18 and the dog's been in hotels. Can you imagine the scenario where I'm booking into a hotel? Yes, madam, and have you had your vaccinations? Oh no, we'll have to get you a vet then, so there will be another $300 on your bill to get your vaccinations done. Oh, you're a menacing person, we need to have security for you, so I better ring up and get 2 security guards at $2,000. So I think you've just been ridiculous on some of the comments, so I just thought I'd just end that with that.
All right. Look, just as right a reply before we go to vote, thanks, councillors, for your comments there. I think we'd be having quite a different discussion if the unrealistic expectations weren't set at the start around the budget and possibly even the time frame. So that's just, I agree with Councillor Beattie, we probably should just review this. I differ in her opinion that there has been some checks and balances that probably could have been done, and it's probably led us to quite a different sort of conversation. I think the window's closed on all those other options. It clearly has, and as many councillors have spoken about, we are in real risk here, and we just have to proceed. I'm hating the numbers, and it's a consistent theme in more recent times in this council, and it's something that does need to stop at some stage. So, look, we're a city that has some responsibilities. We're locked into some legislative requirements, and we've got to provide a compliant facility at some time. I just don't think we can delay this. I'm really, really sorry. It does seem like we are building it all at any cost, and again, I would like that reviewed around the whole process, but we are locked in. I'm really sorry, but we are locked in and we have to push go. So if you could support this, please, we will vote. Thank you. Okay, that is passed 12 votes for and 4 against. Right, councillors, and officers, we'll break now. If I could just ask the councillors to stay in the chamber, please. I want to have a quick chat to you very quickly on an urgent matter. But if I can ask the officers if they could leave. No, because I want the microphones, I'm sorry.